Minnesota a little bit, and so unfortunately some of the modeling was some of the early way Minnesota reformed quite extensively, and we're now trying to persuade Iowa to act a little bit more like Minnesota, in fact.
Yeah, and we'll probably have more questions with the expansion.
Right.
Of conditions.
Yeah, because expansion of conditions and really the THC content situation is also probably one of the most major issues overall. And both Minnesota and Illinois have both addressed that and have good programs as a result. We, with our friends up at the Hill, we have some success with them. Maybe we'll have that addressed in Iowa here too.
Okay. And we have some materials. Would you like those now as we talk through things?
Sure.
Would that be helpful?
And then we'll go ahead and get started. Sure. We'll probably invite you to just do kind of an opening statement.
Absolutely.
And then we'll dive in with questions.
Here, I'll give two to you. Oh, sure.
Do you want to hand that one out as well?
Yes, that's in the folder.
Oh, it's in the folder. Okay. Great.
So we're here with the Des Moines Register Editorial Board today to discuss the medical marijuana program as it's currently constituted and may change in Iowa. From your left is Lauren Burt, Worldwide Communications Manager at Kemin Industries, Dr. Chris Nelson, who's CEO and President of Kemin Industries and owner of MedPharm Iowa. And then Lucas Nelson, who is General Manager of Outsourcing Services, and Rebecca Lucas, Global Business Development Manager. I'll also introduce members of the editorial board and the Register staff. I'm Carol Hunter, Executive Editor of the Register.
I'm Tony Lays, a reporter with Register.
Rachel Stassenberger, the political editor here.
David Shivers, President of the Register.
We'll dive right in. Dr. Nelson, if you want to give an opening statement.
Well, thanks so much, and really our pleasure to be able to be here today. It's really, we're pleased to be able to talk to the Register Editorial Board on what we think is a critical issue. Kemin Industries, and I'll talk a little bit about Kemin, we have been in the business of growing and extracting specialty plants for nearly 30 years. And one of the probably the most prominent one that we do is that we grow literally 50,000 acres of marigold flowers every year. We extract those and purify a chemical by the name of lutein, which is critical for eyesight, deposited in the macula of the eye, prevents macular degeneration, leading cause of blindness of people over 40. We've been watching very carefully the whole situation around cannabis for the last 5 years, been very aware of the nearly 400 different compounds that are contained within the plant, and how many of these compounds are known to have very positive medical benefits. But because of the regulatory stature around the plant, it's been difficult, if not impossible, to do anything with this plant. In the state of Iowa, last July, the governor signed into law a measure that allowed for the manufacture of medical cannabis extracts within the state, particularly focused on cannabinoids. And we made the early decision that we were going to apply for one of the 2 licenses to be able to do that manufacture. We assembled, Lucas and his team assembled a team and put together a plus 500-page application that went into the state last year, and we were fortunate enough to be granted one of those licenses. Part of those licenses are that we have to be able to have product manufactured and on the shelf by December 1st of 2018. I'm pleased to report we're on schedule to be able to do that. Probably the most recent news, of course, was the granting of 5 dispensary licenses within the state. Because no one else had applied for a manufacturing license, we were initially afraid that no one would apply for a dispensary license. So we made the decision that we would apply for all 5. We were lucky that some other people also applied for some, but we were also granted 2 of those licenses, and so that we will be able to manufacture products for all 5 of the dispensaries, and will specifically be selling to the general public for 2 of them. We're very excited. Chema and MedPharm, and it is really MedPharm that is doing all of this effort, is very excited because we believe there's an enormous amount of research that still needs to be done on these on this plant and its extracts. We're excited to be part of that research effort, and I would say though that we are concerned a bit with the status of the law that's here in the state of Iowa. We have 3 principal concerns, but 2 are very high on our list. The first has to do with the level of THC that is allowed within the state. Our law allows for only a 3% to be allowed, and to maybe put that in perspective, let me give you a concept, is that, and this is shown actually in your handout, to be able at 3%, it's well understood, for instance, that at about 140 milligrams of THC are required to be able to provide pain relief. That's a middle dosage, depending, of course, of what your issue is. With the 3%, that will require nearly 16 pills. You'll have to be able to take 16 pills to be able to achieve that. States like Minnesota and Illinois, which have no THC cap, are able to achieve that with 1 or 2 pills. Much more reasonable for the patient to be able to purchase, as well as just reasonability to be able to actually have a dosage. So this THC cap is actually something that we're very concerned about. Secondly is the diseases or conditions which make you eligible to be able to purchase the products. We have a very limited list in the state of Iowa, but perhaps of most concerning is the term that is in the current law, which calls for untreatable pain. Untreatable pain for most physicians is a terribly confusing term. They feel if it's totally untreatable, then they're not eligible for anything. So why should they be given have any access to any material? And when does a particular pain become untreatable? We really believe that we should adopt something similar to what, say, Illinois and Minnesota have adopted, which is more about severe and chronic pain, and that is certainly a concern. Plus a number of other, conditions that we think are important. The third and final issue, which we say is actually minor but important, and that is that sales tax is being charged on all of these products. We know that in regular medicines this is not the case, and we feel that medical cannabis should fall into that same category. So, importantly, there are some legislation pending in front of this session of the legislature. And we have just a few weeks left of this session, as we well know. And we believe for this to be able to offer to the citizens of Iowa the type of medical cannabis program that they were looking for, we need to do something this session before this starts in December 1st. And why, you'd say, why is it so urgent? Well, you can imagine that a patient comes in December 1st and is able to purchase something for pain, and takes 1 or 2 pills and feels nothing because, of course, the dosage is too low. That would then make the whole concept of medical cannabis in the state of Iowa really a failure. And I don't think that's at all what the legislature had in mind when they passed the original law last July. Lucas, what did I forget?
Pretty good summary. I think one point to kind of draw together some of the goals we're hoping to accomplish in this legislative session is that our program right now, for lack of a better term, has some absurdity to it. And what I mean there is that in about 30 states, in 29 states in the District of Columbia, you've got full, robust programs that treat a number of conditions, a number of forms available, and then no cap on THC. And you've got another set of laws, right now it's about 16, that are CBD focused. And so these are programs that are designed to treat epilepsy and a few of the other conditions that would be treated by CBD. In those laws, you do have a cap on THC, and it works okay because you're not trying to treat conditions that need that THC. Iowa's combined those two, but in some ways picked the worst parts. So they've got a list of conditions that can be treated, which is more expansive than in some CBD states, a good thing. But we don't have right now the ability to produce the products that would actually allow you to treat those conditions. Again, because that THC is so important for pain management, for cancer, HIV, some of these other conditions. Without a change, those people that don't fall within the epilepsy and some of the other conditions that can be treated by CBD are, like Chris said, probably going to be disappointed, probably not find that relief they need. So it's that real absurdity, like I mentioned, that we're hoping we can get corrected this session.
Questions you might have, yes.
If you had these issues with the law, why did you invest so much in setting up your business?
You know, I would say this, is that I'm a lifelong resident of the state of Iowa. I have extraordinary faith in the legislative process. I've seen laws that are initially passed that are not as workable as they should be. People bring that before the legislature, and in general, I would say it's been things have been changed, and so I would say that we are optimistic that this will change within the state of Iowa.
What happens if it doesn't? What happens to your business?
Well, if it's not changed, we're still going to go ahead and offer the material out, and we'll continue to work for the change during the next legislative session. What's going to happen long term, I hate to predict at this point, but if terrible things, and if nobody ends up being able to gets cards or doesn't find relief, eventually we will have to pull the products from the market.
Can you talk a little bit more about the business impact of this? I mean, you've talked about patients and their needs, but this is a business for you.
Absolutely, and just like any other business that we've been in the past, where we're growing specialty plants, extracting them, and then selling the purified contents out to the public. Eventually, we have to make a profit to be able to reinvest. Kemin is very research intensive. Approximately 8% of our sales is reinvested into research and development each year. MedPharm is in a very similar situation, and so we're looking forward to actively reinvesting. But without profits, obviously, that just simply can't happen.
What are some of the biggest obstacles facing the legislature in terms of making these changes? Why did the law move forward the way it has in terms of some what seem like significant differences to some of our neighbors in the way that they're handling?
Lucas has spent most of the last 2 months up at the Capitol. I'll let him try to answer that.
I think a lot of it ultimately centers on lack of understanding and some misinformation. If you look at the conditions piece, talk about that for a moment. There is a question on, how should we approach this in the first place? Are we in the best position, we the legislature, are we in the best position to evaluate research and decide, yes, this particular condition, there's enough out there to say medical cannabis could be beneficial. And on this particular condition, there isn't. What we found is a very wide range of opinions on that particular topic. And in fact, our current legislation that we're very supportive of actually addresses that issue by removing the legislature from this decision. We've heard from numerous legislators that they don't want to get into the role of playing doctor and saying, yes, this does or doesn't count.
Retire their stethoscopes.
Yes. What we've done is propose language that actually puts that decision back into the doctor's hands, back into the patient-doctor relationship. It would allow patients to be certified by their physicians for any condition that the doctor believes medical cannabis might be medically beneficial. Again, the doctor is the one who is face-to-face with the patient, understands the treatment regimen that is going on, that may go on in the future, understands the condition itself and also how it's manifesting itself within that patient. Also, the doctors are in the best position to keep up with current research. The legislature is not doing that. And it's not necessarily their place. Of course, we understand why they're not. So that's one way we've tried to address that. The THC issue, there's a wide range of theories on why it settled where it did. Some of the epilepsy products that were the first ones to kind of make waves throughout the state, those are capped in their THC. Again, it goes back to the same point that we discussed earlier. CBD is really the main compound that's needed for epilepsy patients, not THC. Some low levels may be necessary for certain epilepsy patients, but across the board, as a general statement, that CBD is more important. Well, what happened was these conditions expanded, but again, that cap was kept in place and doesn't allow for that full treatment. We've had a lot of discussion on what the actual 3% means. Again, like we mentioned at the beginning, what it's really doing is harming the patients because it's causing them to have to take more doses to get to a certain milligram of THC they need, and it's going to cost them more. There was a thought that the 3% would somehow prohibit them from obtaining a certain level of THC. The law doesn't do that. Patients will be able to get to that dose they need, just in a very ineffective and not practical way. The bill was passed in the dead of night at the very end of session, which certainly might have contributed to some of the questions and unanswered, issues there. Governor Branstad, when he signed it, actually addressed that and said, hey, there are some fixes here in his signing statement. There are some fixes here that need to be made. So there was recognition that we've gotten to a point, but there's still more work to be done, I think. It's that work that we're hoping to accomplish this session.
Are there any other states that have this list of ailments that have that kind of limit on THC, or is Iowa the only one?
So there are other states that have had caps in place at first that have then lifted that cap as they've expanded conditions. There is a state like Georgia that has very, very few conditions and a cap. Right now, in fact, interestingly enough, New Jersey had a cap in place and has found that for a state that has an incredible population, the medical cannabis program was failing in that state. So they've actually, the governor has just signed a big expansion of that program that increased the number of conditions, lifted that THC level, again, recognizing that it just wasn't delivering the benefits that it was intended to because it really can't. So those states that are focused on CBD, they've stayed kind of in that range, low THC, and they're treating epilepsy, and that's about it. For those that have expanded conditions, you've seen the cap either go away or increase dramatically to a point where it's actually able to be effective.
So based on, and maybe you already know this, Tony, I don't, the number of states that have less limitations on medical marijuana versus the states that are at parity with Iowa or more restrictive. I don't know if there are ones that are more restrictive. What are those numbers?
So there's about 30 states right now that have those robust programs, much better than Iowa's. More expansive, longer list of conditions, more options for the patients. And then that second number is about 16. Iowa fits in there. Those are, again, those CBD programs that have a range of successfulness for each of those programs.
Okay.
If they're designed to treat just epilepsy, then you see some benefits. A state like Indiana has just passed a CBD law where it's designed to treat epilepsy. It's probable that law wouldn't have some of the issues we do here in Iowa. Again, pain patients, cancer patients, aren't going to be able to access the program in the first place. So they're not going to be disappointed and kind of under this guise that my condition
right.
can be treated. Exactly.
So House Speaker Meyer yesterday told reporters that, look, we set this up less than a year ago. We set up this special committee that was going to advise, and it's mostly physicians, that's going to advise us on these very matters. We haven't heard back from them an official recommendation yet. We want to wait until, and she said that was a major selling point to some lawmakers who were leery of the whole thing, that there was going to be this expert committee that was going to make recommendations. They're still waiting on those recommendations. So what's your response to that?
So
Did you start?
they did file a report to the legislature in January that basically summed up what they had done and did not offer really any recommendations. There's a number of problems with the current board. First, the law actually limited them to only meeting 4 times a year. The amount of information that these folks have to process and have to understand can't be done in 4 meetings. There was also an issue with understanding what the board's charge was versus kind of general commenting on the program itself. Larger debates around things that unfortunately they don't have a say in as prescribed under the law right now. So that distracted, I think, and prohibited them from being able to really utilize every minute of their time. Unfortunately, there isn't probably the level of education on the board as a whole that there needs to be, and they haven't been given enough opportunity to access that education either. Obviously, there's a lot on their plate. There's a lot on the Department of Public Health's plate. It's a matter of resources. We understand all of that, but to strictly rely on what this board does or doesn't do when it hasn't been given the time, the resources to really understand this industry as a whole and hear from patients, hear from other physicians, that sort of thing. I think that's why we've seen it take a little bit longer to get off the ground.
Overall, I think it's really about a somewhat of a digestion of information and what the requirements are. This is a good example. The National Academy of Sciences published a complete review of what cannabinoids could do and their health effects overall, and that was published about 1.5 years ago. An enormous amount of scientific reading, and literally, I don't think with 4 meetings, there is no way that you could discuss what was going on in this and some of the conclusions. For instance, that the National Academy said that there's no question that this should be utilized for pain. Now, how does that work in Iowa under the law that we have? They really seriously have not had really an opportunity, just given the restrictions that the law had with them. So, we agree with the speaker is that this is a really valuable committee and group. They need to be given more of a chance and maybe given a little more direction from the legislature of what the expectations are from the committee. And we've been at all the meetings. I'd say it's remarkable that they keep sort of asking, well, so what what are we supposed to be doing? And I think that's a general feeling that they have.
And of the 30 that have what I'd call more expansive laws in terms of conditions and THC limits and those sorts of things, how long have they had? I guess part of the question assumes that lots of states have done this. Lots of states are in various parts of the process. At some level, you have to ask yourself, I think, if you're in state government, how much time and attention do we want to give to investigating things that may have perhaps been investigated in other states?
Reinventing the wheel.
Exactly. To that end, maybe inherent that is, are we reinventing the wheel? But more specifically, of the 30 states, how long have those laws been on the books, and sort of what has the path been to from where kind of we are today to where they are today?
Yeah, so you've got a state like California, maybe not the best example, but that has had a medical program since the late 90s. You've got a state like Colorado, who was 2010, I think, when they introduced their medical cannabis program. You've got newer states who, like Pennsylvania is a good example of a state that has a really fantastic set of laws and is already, because they didn't reinvent the wheel, is now thinking, what's the next step? They're working with licensing their medical schools within the state to do research. It's that type of program that I think would have benefited Iowa best, is look at these states that have had programs for years and years, take the best pieces of those, make that ours, and then find out how can we create an even better program here in the state. Again, Pennsylvania, this is a breakthrough, and this is brand new. The fact that they're willing to go out there and work within the guidelines of the state's program, within what the medical schools in that state want to do, that's where we'd love to have seen Iowa go. I mean, we have fantastic research schools right here in the state. Why not take advantage of that instead of taking the 7, 8, 10 steps backwards and starting slow?
Now, one of the things that we've talked actively about with Illinois and Minnesota having very strong programs, wouldn't it be nice if the leaders who are manufacturing in both of those states, along with ourselves, could collaborate together in a sort of a Midwest consortium? Material still cannot cross state lines, so you cannot take some material from Illinois and bring it to the University of Iowa and do research. You have to make in Iowa what's going to be used in Iowa. The problem right now is that when we talk to the people in Minnesota and Illinois, they said, well, Iowa's with this 3% THC cap, we will never test a product like that. It's not worthwhile for us because we know the efficacy is not there. And so as a result, there's sort of no hope for a Midwest consortium until we're all playing on the same field and at the same time.
And is there any chance to do that until federal law changes?
Well, in other words, the concept would be this, is that, all right, if we're all using the same dosage, Minnesota, Illinois, Iowa, let's agree on a dosage. We'll run a trial at the University of Iowa. You could run the same trial in Minnesota, and you manufacture in Minnesota the same material that's manufactured in Iowa. We don't cross state lines with it. We would just keep the dosages the same. You see what I'm saying by how that would work?
How much of an impediment is the federal law to all of this?
Significant.
This is still illegal.
Significant.
This whole thing is illegal.
Significant. This is still a Schedule I drug.
Mm-hmm.
This is still a Schedule I drug. And there's no doubt that the federal law is truly inhibiting overall the true advancement of what the medicinal value of this plant can be. There's no question about that. There's restrictions from everything from the crossing of the material from state lines to all the banking that needs to be done and all the related industries. So it's an inhibition.
How are you doing that?
We've taken from examples from other states, and that has been an advantage that Iowa has not been the first one in. And so some of our banks in the state are being very innovative and understanding what they can do. We're taking obviously a risk knowing that it's a Schedule I drug, but we take solace from the fact that the Department of Justice has no funding to be able to enforce anything relating to medical cannabis. So that combined with a good state law, we've heard repeatedly from Justice that they're going to leave those people alone in those states if they're following the state laws.
Lucas, you brought up Colorado and California. Those are the states that the conservatives in the legislature are afraid of. They don't want to see happen in Iowa what happened in Colorado and California.
Certainly
Starting with medical and then moving into recreational. I mean, what's your response to that?
We understand that. We're not interested in the recreational side of this at all. What we're interested in is making this medical program survive and making sure that the patients who are able to receive any benefit from this program are actually able to. Again, modeling ourselves off a state like Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Illinois would work just as well. And those are states that are only medical. So Colorado has certainly learned a lot. Having gone before us, California would be the same. Colorado has learned a lot about the banking and some of these other ancillary businesses that have to be connected to the industry if it's to survive. That gives us a nice advantage to be able to see what those states have done. But at the same time, I don't think those states are perfect by any means either. So we've really, and what MedPharm has done is really tried to focus in on nationwide what has worked, what hasn't worked, and understanding that there are absolutely pieces in states even that have a recreational aspect to them. Those medical programs in those states have a lot to offer. Just like the medical programs here or north of us in Minnesota and Illinois have a lot to offer as well. Combining all of that into one great program here in the state is exactly what we're after. Slower progress than we would hope, of course, but
Are you saying that MedPharm cannot survive under the current law?
I would say this, is that we are going to give it the very best try that we can and instruct patients from a scientific standpoint of what we think dosages that are going to be required and so on. I think the jury is out if we can survive under the current law or not. And we've made a commitment that we're in it for multi-years. We're not going to give up after, certainly after 2020 or something like that. But I can say this, is that long term, if the state's laws are so restrictive that patients don't get any relief, patients won't get cards, patients won't buy material, and so there'll be no reason to have a MedPharm Iowa.
Chris, I have to ask you, you talked about how it's illegal to bring these materials across state lines. I've
Right.
already asked Lucas this. Where did you get your seeds? Or where are you going to get your seeds?
It remains confidential because we've got also some germplasm that is also there. Do understand though, in 1945, Iowa was the number 3 marijuana producer in the United States. It was called hemp.
Mm-hmm.
It was used for rope. It's the same plant.
But did you bring it across state lines, or are you going
No, in 1945, I don't know how it got here in 1945.
No, but are you the seeds that you're going to use, or are you?
I really can't say. Really can't say.
One thing I'm interested in, you emphasized that you're an Iowa company.
Mhm.
Could you talk about MedPharm Iowa and what the association is with MedPharm?
Sure. So, MedPharm Colorado is actually owned primarily by 3 individuals, 2 Iowans and a Coloradoan. Myself as one of the owners, T.J. Youngsrud from here in Iowa, and a guy by the name of Andy Williams are the three principal owners. That company was formed about 3 years ago and has developed much of the intellectual property that has to do with especially medical dosages. We have a very, very unique cream that will be offered in the state of Iowa, have a unique soft gel that will also be offered in the state of Iowa, and I think a very scientifically derived oil or tincture that will be offered. The intellectual property for MedPharm Iowa was developed by MedPharm Colorado, and that intellectual property will be transferred here for the usage that we come out in the market with in December. So that's sort of the relationship between the two.
And who owns MedPharm Iowa?
I do.
Okay.
100%.
And does MedPharm Colorado do the same sort of, have the same sort of relationship with other states too?
At this time, we're seeking to have other relations with other states as we develop this intellectual property, especially around medical applications. So we're seeking to have those relationships with other states. It's becoming highly competitive throughout the United States. We've got a few ideas that we're working with right now, but right now it's just Colorado and Iowa.
And do you have any dispensaries in Colorado?
No, there's no dispensaries. This is strictly a manufacturing facility there.
And do you sell recreational out of that? Or
It is also, the MedPharm Colorado also sells recreational as well as the medical products.
Okay. But do they sell smokable or
No,
not?
it's vapor material.
Okay.
Again, I'd say what MedPharm Colorado has specialized in is really growing plants under very strict conditions, completely organic, and then being able to understand how to extract them and characterize the various molecules that are within the extract. So you don't smoke any of that.
Iowans who are interested in this topic, I know there is public interest around changing this law to include other conditions, etc. We've written extensively about that. What would you advise them? What steps would you advise them to take to?
Right now, I think our advice would be to contact your legislator, especially members of the House. and that you need to actively say that something has to be done this session in regards to the Iowa law. And that's probably going to be the best way to guarantee that that we have a very vibrant, sustainable law within the state of Iowa.
Have you gotten any sense from the governor how she feels about it?
You know, we know that the governor was certainly very supportive of the law that was signed last year. We haven't had enough of a chance really to discuss fully the changes that are being proposed. I know that she was also feeling the same as Governor Branstad, that as he signed the bill, he noted that changes needed to be made. I'm pretty certain that she's in that same boat.
I'm just going back to the business part of this in my mind.
Sure.
Right now, you're a monopoly.
Well, not purposefully. There were two licenses offered in the state. We were the only ones that applied, and so in the sense that a license is a monopoly, I can talk to you about all the casinos within the state. They all have monopolies within their given geographical area. We believe that two things. So first of all, that we know that it's an enormous investment to be able to set up a growing extraction facility with the analytical equipment, the chemical analytical equipment you're needed to be able to guarantee dosages. We know at the same time that unless we offer the material at reasonable prices comparable to the states around us, that patients are going to buy this. I mean, patients can still, if are desperate, can drive to Illinois, or drive to Colorado, get material, and come back. Yes, it's illegal federally, but if the state of Iowa offered material that was too expensive, people will do that. So the laws of capitalism are still very much intact in this sense. Yes.
So you said you reasonable prices. What will that mean for the average consumer? And you talked a little bit about the business struggling if these changes aren't made.
Right.
Might you hike those prices to make back the difference?
Well, in the end, the first of all, the understanding where the pricing will be, as I'd say, is the easiest way to understand pricing is probably go to some of the dispensaries in Illinois and Minnesota. You're going to see material in Iowa priced very similarly to that. And in fact, we believe because of the technology we've developed in Colorado, we're actually going to be more efficient at being able to provide material, especially because of the way that we've chosen to extract the plants using supercritical carbon dioxide.
Can you give us a rough range of how much are we talking a month?
See, this all depends on what your malady is,
Sure.
and so it's very.
Let's say a child with epilepsy.
Child with epilepsy.
You'd probably be between, I will say, anywhere from as low as 40 to up to 80 to 90 for a dose. How long that may last you is
not for a dose, but for a container.
Yes, and that could last you for a few days, or if your condition, isn't as severe, maybe it lasts you for a month. I think the range of numbers we've seen kind of surveying across the states that have medical programs is about anywhere from $250 to $500 a month that your typical patient is spending. I imagine Iowa will fall in that range. I don't have any reason to think it would be higher or lower than that. We're hopeful that we'll have a range of options available for those that may need a little bit more. They can buy it in a bigger quantity. For those that may only need a week's supply or are trying to treat something for a very finite amount of time, then we'll have options available for them too to help keep that cost under control.
And additionally, on the economical aspects of it, it's really dependent on whether this cap stays in place. Because if someone needs 35 milligrams of THC, are they paying for 1 pill a day, or are they paying for 20 pills a day? So that will really expand the range of what people will be paying and if it will actually be economical for them.
Are you also effectively competing with black market weed dealers? I mean, it's readily available and is not that
I would say absolutely not, because of, first of all, of what the product that we're providing. First of all, is grown under conditions, and obviously when we finally have some plants, and we'll have you down the tour through it, you'll see it's a very high tech farming. But secondly, that we make an extract, which frankly is not on the market in the black market area. And the extract is highly defined. We will be able to tell you exactly the chemicals that are present. Today, you go out and if you were on the black market, you don't really know what you're buying.
Sure.
And that'll be a definitive difference with medical cannabis.
You have sites around the world with Kemen.
We sure do.
Is this a potential worldwide market for you?
You know, we're watching as the world is actually watching the United States and Canada to see what's happening in the area of cannabis. You know, there are places like Israel which have a very active medicinal cannabis market already. But there's other places where cannabis remains absolutely where it was, say, in 1975 in the United States. So we're watching very carefully. We do see it as a scalable business worldwide if legislation allows for it to happen.
And would this plant here in Des Moines help serve that market if the...
There's no question that we've got sufficient space in Des Moines for Iowa. Now, we also have a large amount of expansion space available within the same facility. So the Iowa facility is available. We currently extract marigold flowers. We bring the marigold flowers all the way from India and extract them here and concentrate them here and purify them here. And we ship that worldwide. So when you deal with a purified molecule of a particular plant, it is economical to ship from one place, like ship from Iowa. It's not economical if you're shipping hundreds and hundreds of tons.
Is that part of your play here, though, why you're building this pretty extensive plant here in Des Moines? Is hoping in the future you'll...
Well, two reasons for building it in Des Moines. First of all, this is our headquarters, our world headquarters. Sure. This is where we have all of our research and development people. This is where we have the technology, that we've been able to translate the technology from Colorado to Des Moines. Mm-hmm. So all of that is here. It's a very logical place to put the first plant here. And then what happens from this point, Luke is still a young guy, so he's going to have lots of opportunity to expand this on much more on a worldwide basis, but that's going to be dependent really strictly on legislation.
So how much of what you plan to do in the near term at the Des Moines plant is for Iowa versus research, international research, potential?
Now this, I would say, in worldwide domination. I'll tell you, in capitalism, nobody truly does worldwide capitalism. I'd say first of all that this plant is designed for Iowa, and I mean size-wise, it is sized for the state of Iowa, and it has the ability to be expanded significantly, but initially it'll be for this market. Again, as I say, it's really a legislative idea of how far we can take this in the future. But Kemen is an international company. MedPharm has the advantage of being able to source services from Kemen, and as a result, has access to all of the international expertise that we have on a worldwide basis.
Thank you.
I wanted to circle back on the idea of, in essence, kind of trying to let it be a physician's choice what should be able to be treated with the products you make. I haven't looked at that legislation. Would it literally be a physician's choice, or is there still some sort of board that would kind of say, well, you can go this far but not this far?
So, multiple ways to answer that, I'll say. The legislation right now leaves the list of debilitating conditions intact. So those are the 9 that are there. The provision is in your handout for later, and what it says is any other condition for which the healthcare practitioner, which is a defined term in the law, reasonably believes that medical cannabis could be medically beneficial. And there's some other kind of limiting factors. It has to be a good faith basis, and there has to be a relationship between that doctor and patient already. It's not a situation where you can doctor shop. So those are some of the bounds that the the legislation would put in place.
I
Then
would say
of course,
it's very similar to off-label prescribing.
exactly.
In other words, that physicians today have the ability to, don't have to hold exactly to what the FDA has said for a drug can use. A physician can prescribe a drug for another condition if he or she wishes.
And that's where the idea actually came from as well. The second part is that these physicians are still regulated by the Board of Medicine, and there's still malpractice issues, of course. They kind of also would help guide what any particular physician is doing. So again, with the combination of the off-label idea, also having those boundaries, I think presents a really safe position for those physicians to make the decision that they feel comfortable with, and to have those conversations with their patients, and again, hopefully be able to treat more people that might be able to benefit from this program.
And it also provides quite an innovative and agile system as well. Think about rare variants or orphan diseases. It doesn't make sense for someone to go up to legislators for each of those conditions. It makes more sense for a doctor who's very specialized in that field to be able to say, okay, I've read literature, I think that this could be a really beneficial thing for you. So it allows the program to also be more agile in respect to what do patients need.
And it's interesting, you look across the country. Virginia has a program like this right now. Very innovative, and the physicians are ecstatic in that state, reading pieces about it and kind of collecting all the quotes that we've seen, is the happiness that now that decision's back in our hands. To tie it back to the cannabis board here, what we have heard from them is, as they've kind of crisscrossed down the road, they're very interested in making sure they're still part of a patient's treatment plan if that patient is going to use medical cannabis. I think this allows those physicians to stay in that relationship, allows them to continue those discussions, and really does keep them at the forefront of treating the patient.
What did you expect us to ask that we didn't ask?
You haven't asked anything about opioids.
Okay.
We've probably heard that pitch before.
I'm sure you've heard the pitch before about and the interaction between cannabis and opioids. In the presentation, you'll see in the last couple of slides, there's some direct data in regards to the scientific data of what the interaction between the two is, and we do see. As a biochemist, I know that the receptors in the brain that are sensitive for opioids and the receptors in the brains that are sensitive for the cannabinoids are very different. And when you're in pharmacology and you can treat a disease by treating two different types of receptors, you have a much better chance of being able to use a much less amount of either of the chemicals. This is exactly what's been discovered with the opioids and cannabis, is that you're able to dramatically reduce the amount of opioids that are needed to be able to attain pain control. Not that you eliminate them completely, but what you do is you dramatically reduce that. And that's the difference between becoming addicted on an opioid and not. It's really the level and amount that you have to take of the opioid. And so we think that it's a side issue, but it's truly a health concern within the state of Iowa. We know that there's tragedy happening literally every day with opioids, and the types of things that have been talked about. Really, okay, how are we going to treat these people with very chronic pain that have been utilizing opioids? What can we do for them? Are we just going to tell them, sort of give them a piece of leather to chew on, and that's going to be the new idea? To me, that's not logical.
Do you need the higher THC to make that happen?
Well, again, we can change, with say 16 pills. Practically, the answer is yes. It can be done under the current law, but is that practical? And can anybody afford to buy? Because of course we're going to have to be charging by the pills because that's what the cost is in the pills.
There's a reference in your handout about taking a typical Aleve or Tylenol and how many you would have to take, and that.
Yeah, if there was a 3% limit on the active ingredient in Aleve, what you would have to do, you'd have to take 20 of them.
So if you took a handful of your 3% THC pills, is there any side effect from taking that much of everything else that's in those pills?
Well, of the material that's in the pills is basically alginate. So no, the answer is no. It's all.
It's a
all
THC delivery device.
Yeah, it's a THC delivery device, just as your fish oil is in the same type of gel cap.
But you wouldn't be taking a massive amount of CBD or anything like
No,
that?
no. Well, in other words, if the CBD that is there, the advantage that we have is we're going to control the amount of CBD and THC that's in each pill. So we're going to change the ratios depending on what the material is that we have. So if you took, we will certainly have situations with pills with, say, equal amounts of CBD and THC. If you took a whole handful, let's say the 3% is gone, you took a whole handful, there's going to be some side effects. Absolutely. Side effects and direct effects, I should say.
Just quickly on the number of cards, it is a low number in Iowa so far, but the program hasn't really started yet.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
I don't know that the comparison that you have here.
Yeah, well, I think what the comparison is, what we wanted to say is that if Iowa had a program similar to Minnesota and Illinois, this is the percentage of cards of the population that we could expect to see, and that's really the comparison. We think that the Midwest is a good representative of what's happening, and regardless of what we say about people from Minnesota and what they say about people from Iowa, they're basically all the same. It's not true. It's not true.
It's warm in Iowa. You guys don't believe me.
I think another point to make on looking at our neighbors is we want to provide a program that's similar to our neighbors. So if we have someone that's suffering in Iowa, maybe at the northern border of Iowa, and they have a condition that can't be treated in Iowa but can be treated in Minnesota, I think it's a little bit discouraging because their condition can't be treated the same and isn't deserving of treatment as if they were just living 20 miles north. So I think it's about providing in the Midwest really a comprehensive program that can treat all of the conditions that it needs to.
And that goes back to this whole consortium idea.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you again for coming in.
Oh, no.
Very-
Well, thank you for
Thank you.
seeing us for the afternoon, and we're open and we're happy to answer more questions as the facility gets done this summer, and we actually start an extraction and have the first material on to offer to consumers. We'll be inviting you down many more times. If you Inspector Lauren will be inviting you down many more times to see what's going
Well,
on.
no,
and
we'll say this
as we
on tape.
turn
You
it.
should invite Tony first, and then you can invite the other.
Okay, all right. No, I think Lauren's got Tony's number on speed dial.
That's true.
Well, again, thanks for your time.
Thank you very
I
much.
appreciate it. And by the way, this book is for Tony, so